Well, thanks for joining us for the Q&A podcast produced by C-SPAN. I'm your host, Peter Slen. This week, our guests are Cornel West and Robert George, two professors, two authors, one progressive, one conservative, one black, one white, and best friends for 30 years. Our conversation with them begins shortly.
This summer, honor your democracy hero and ignite C-SPAN's America 250 coverage, our 18-month ad-free celebration of our nation's story. Give $25 or more by August 31st at cspan.org/donate to add the person who first showed you democracy in action to our Democracy Hero wall. We'll thank you with a C-SPAN decal. Your gift keeps these stories alive nationwide. Donate today at cspan.org/donate. Thank you.
Cornel West is best known as a progressive, a public intellectual, a presidential candidate, a college professor, and a best-selling author. His best friend is Robert "Robbie" George, a conservative professor of law and history at Princeton. Since teaching a class together 30 years ago, they've been best friends. And they've co-authored a new book, Truth Matters. On Q&A this week, we discuss their relationship, their disparate political views, and how they managed to maintain a friendship. We also talk about their new book, Truth Matters, subtitled A Dialogue on Fruitful Disagreement in an Age of Division. Our nearly 2-hour conversation begins now. Cornel West, what are you doing at a libertarian convention?
Well, one, I know you were going to be here, so it's always a blessing to be with you. And when Brother Robbie and I travel in a variety of different contexts, we have a deep love for each other. We wrestle with issues in ways we hope can inspire as well as unsettle people. So I like to go wherever I can to infect people with what Socrates calls perplexity, to unsettle them, to unnerve them, to challenge them, but I also come to learn and listen.
Robert George, when did you and Cornel West first meet?
We first met in the early 1990s when Cornel arrived at Princeton. I had already been on the faculty for a few years. We were in some faculty seminars together, and I always appreciated Cornel's insights in those seminars. He was asking all the right questions. That was the thing that really struck me. He was asking all the deep questions, the important questions, questions about meaning and value. Now, I didn't think he was always getting them quite right, but he was asking the right questions and keeping us on topic. And then a few years after that, about 2005, I got a visit in my office hours from a student who had been a student in Cornel's classes as well as a student in my classes. And he told me about a new magazine that he and some of his fellow students were creating at Princeton called The Green Light. It was going to be a magazine of arts and culture and literature and politics. And for the first issue and every subsequent issue, the plan was to have a feature that would be an interview of one faculty member by another faculty member. And he explained to me that they'd invited Professor Cornel West, who at that point I would say was a friendly acquaintance more than a friend, Professor Cornel West to be the interviewer, and ask him who he would like to interview. And he said that he would like to interview me. Well, I was very flattered that the great Cornel West wanted to interview me. So we had the session and we did the interview. It was supposed to go on for an hour. It went on for more than 4 hours, almost 4.5 hours. And pretty shortly after that, we had such a good time that we decided to start teaching together, which we did until Brother Cornel abandoned me to go to Harvard. And even then he came back on his first leave of absence from Harvard, his first sabbatical, and we taught the seminar again. And ever since then we've been taking our show on the road, speaking to anybody who's willing to listen to us.
Cornel West, you are now at the Union Theological Seminary. What do you teach there?
I teach philosophy and Christian practice, courses on the great Dietrich Bonhoeffer, James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, Paul Tillich, Martin King, Mahatma Gandhi, and Betker, Malcolm X, Lorraine Hansberry. I'm just blessed to be there. I started in 1977, 48 years ago as a young brother, and now I'm back in the same place, same institution, and just delighted to be there.
Are you still teaching your freshman seminar?
No, we haven't been able to teach it in quite a number of years. Cornel's busy teaching his courses up at Union. Of course, I'm still at Princeton. I've just completed my 40th year, actually, at Princeton. Cornell's had itchy feet. He's been to Princeton, Yale, Union, Harvard, over in Europe and different places. I'm just a country boy from West Virginia. And you stick me in one place and I'll stay there. And I've been there for 4 decades.
Many places coming at you. You said no.
But I grab hold of Brother Cornell just every chance I can and bring him down to Princeton for a talk or a dialogue. We were just there together a few weeks ago,
yes.
speaking to the 2025 alumni reunion. We had a wonderful time. We had standing room only, more than 400 people. We signed a lot of books, and we had a wonderful time. And his beloved daughter, my honorary niece, Zaytun, is a student at Princeton. She was there for 4 years as an undergraduate. She is a brilliant, brilliant kid. And then stayed on and is now doing her doctorate, her PhD in German. So Cornell comes down, of course, to visit her, and we get together when we can.
You see, our families come together in just beautiful ways.
That's right, yeah.
Beautiful ways.
What's your relationship with Robert George's family?
Well, one, I met his mother, and I was speechless. I met his father. I was wordless. He just lost both of them just recently.
Just in the last year, But they loved Cornell, and I loved his mother.
And then he met Mom, Irene West, too, so that when you have that kind of deep, it goes deeper than friendship. It's a brotherhood. It really is.
Cornel West, you write in your newest book, Truth Matters, a dialogue on fruitful disagreement in an age of division. What brings us together is something more than a friendship. What brings us together is a fundamental commitment to Socratic intellectual humility.
No, that's true. And you always do your homework, brother, going back many decades that we do together. But you're absolutely right. That what I love about Robert, he says what he means what he says. We live in a culture with so many people pose and posture. They say one thing and they go somewhere else when it comes to deed and action. But Robert says what he means even when he's wrong. And I love him when he's wrong, I love him when he's right. But he's honest, he's got integrity, honesty, and a decency that we need these days. We live in a moment of such spiritual decay and moral decrepitude. It's just hard to generate trust. Where do you stand? Why? Will you be consistent? Will you be constant? That's what we need, and that's what I love in part about this brother. Plus, I just love his humanity, a sense of humor and the quest for truth and beauty and goodness. And then both of us being Christians. He's a Catholic, I'm a hang loose Baptist. But that does make a difference too.
Why
our
does
seminars
everybody
together really work, I think, because we're both dedicated to pursuing truth and to pursuing truth by what Cornell called Socratic dialogue. That means we're not preaching at these young men and women.
That's right.
They get preached at enough. We're not preaching at them. And we're not encouraging them to preach. Quite the reverse. We're raising questions, posing for them the best arguments on the competing sides of the question. If you have a student who's feeding you a whole bunch of left-wing propaganda, it won't have to wait for me. Brother Cornell will be right on him, questioning those assumptions, those presuppositions, making him defend what he's assuming to be true that may very well not be true. Same if you got somebody on the conservative side. If I have a conservative student who's just feeding me right-wing talking points, I don't have to wait for Cornell to challenge him. I'm going to challenge him. So we both proceed by raising questions, trying to make sure that students understand the best that has been thought and said on the competing sides, so that they then can intelligently make up their minds as to where they think the truth lies. I mean, it genuinely is our philosophy. It's a cliche, but it is genuinely our philosophy that we are not interested in telling students what to think. It's not our job to get them to think like us. It's our job to empower them to think more deeply, more critically, which always includes self-critically, and above all, to think for themselves. We want to form young men and women to be independent thinkers, to be determined truth seekers and courageous truth speakers. That's our job. It's not to preach.
Absolutely.
What does it mean to be a Socratic professor? Does that mean you ask more questions and you give answers?
Absolutely. We both had this experience where we get the students so flummoxed by the arguments that seem so compelling that we present on one side, but then the arguments that seem so compelling on the other side. And a student will say, this has happened so often, a student will say, well, just tell me which is right. But of course, that's exactly what we don't do. We don't tell you which is right, because we want you to think for yourself. I have a term for this. I don't want to tell the students what the truth is, even though I have an opinion on what the truth is on many, many questions. I want them to appropriate the truth. I want them to make it their own by thinking their way to it, not being told, not looking it up as if it's a catechism, thinking their way to it.
Cornel West, how did Adventures of Ideas, how did that start? Because you two are senior professors. They don't usually teach freshman seminars.
No. Well, one thing is that we are fundamentally committed to what the Greeks call paideia, which is that formation of attention and the cultivation of critical sensibility and the maturation of compassionate personalities. And Whitehead's great classic of 1933, Adventures of Ideas. Magisterial, masterful, nothing like it. And it begins with prophetic legacies of Jerusalem and Socratic legacies of Athens, and then weaves it all the way through the history of the West. And it is focused on the West. Whitehead would be the first. We would be the second and third to say there's wisdom in a variety of different cultures from Asia, Africa, indigenous peoples across the board. But we've been so deeply shaped by Plato and Aristotle and Augustine and Descartes and Hegel and Nietzsche. We've also so deeply shaped by Amos and Jeremiah and Esther. And of course, as Christians, we are fallible, finite followers of a Palestinian Jew named Jesus from Nazareth. But that doesn't mean that we don't learn from other religious traditions or secular traditions. So that Whitehead's text in many ways was a kind of a symbolic text for us.
That's right.
Is that fair to say, though,
I think that's fair to say, and it was the inspiration really for the seminar, the first freshman seminar we taught, and then for the ones that succeeded that. If you look at the way the seminars proceed, it's really a great books approach. We want to expose the students to the best that has been taught and said throughout history by the best minds in the West. So we typically begin with Sophocles' work Antigone, which poses a great moral challenge. When are we obligated to obey the laws, and when are we obligated to disobey the laws? That is a perennial challenge. We find it in Sophocles all the way back in the ancient world, but we find it in Martin Luther King, whose work, Letter from Birmingham Jail, we conclude the seminar with. But then in between, they study Plato's Gorgias or Plato's Apology, depending on the year of the administration of the course. They study St. Augustine's wonderful Confessions, and they grapple with the issues that Augustine wrestled with. And then we go all the way, forward into the Renaissance and the Reformation, and up into the 19th century. We have them read John Henry Newman and John Stuart Mill, two towering British intellectuals, completely different sensibilities. Newman, a religious genius. Mill, secular to the very core. And then we move into the 20th century. They read, again, two people with very different sensibilities, John Dewey and C.S. Lewis. We have them read Leo Strauss. And it's a wonderful experience wrestling with these great thinkers and their ideas and the issues that they wrestled with. We also put the focus on the primary texts. We don't forbid students from looking at interpretative works when it comes to these authors, but we discourage it. Now, why would we discourage it? We discourage it because we want them engaging with the actual thinkers, engaging with Sophocles, engaging with Plato, St. Augustine, Thomas More, Erasmus, Luther, whoever it is that we're teaching. We want them actually to be involved in the argument. So we don't want the focus to be on how best to interpret what, let's say, Aristotle said about this or that, or what's the proper translation of a Greek term. We're not doing philology or something like that. We're wrestling with the most fundamental ideas. What does it mean to be human? We're wrestling with issues of human nature, the human good, human dignity, human rights, human destiny.
Cornel West, is it important that students at Princeton get an education in Western values?
Well, we want all young people to be shaped in the most profound views and conceptions of what it means to be human. And the best of the West has much to say about that. The worst of the West, like any other set of empires and nations, greed, hatred, envy, resentment, Western crimes. Western voices can be critical of Western crimes. Eastern voices can be critical of Eastern crimes. Black voices can be critical of black crimes. Across the board, you see. Meaning what? We're at the level of humanity. And that's a deep level. It's frightening down there. Just how wretched we are in terms of how at our worst we treated people so viciously, and at our best been able to generate conceptions of truth and beauty and goodness and the holy that's highly critical of the worst, both of ourselves, of any culture in that way. And so in many ways, we're really about this internationalism, a universalism that certainly has roots, and all of our roots are provincial. We all have precious mamas and daddies and communities, but provincialism is not the same as parochialism. Parochialism is like stupidity, where you have no interest in wanting to grow, no interest in the truth, no interest in wanting to mature. All of us are in some way ignorant. We've got a learned ignorance that we've been wrestling with for many years, right? But it means that we still are interested in calling that ignorance into question. And on a deeper level, it's not just ignorance, it's the indifference. Because one of the things we note when we bring our students into our class, you come here to learn how to die. And when you learn how to die, you question yourself, you examine yourself, and you let something go. And when you let something go, you're a different person. You're in the process of being reborn. That's what maturation is all about. And so it's about, yes, love of wisdom like Socrates, but very much like Jesus, love of neighbor, love of enemy, love of person. Socrates never sheds a tear. Anybody who's never shed a tear has never loved anybody. Jesus weeps for Lazarus, Jerusalem. We want both intellectual integrity, prophetic enactment, but students must in the end find their own voices and think for themselves.
Back to your book, Truth Matters. If you're looking for a safe space, you're in the wrong classroom.
That's true.
That's true. That's true.
You're going to be very unsettled and very uncomfortable, no matter who you are in our classroom. Doesn't matter whether you're Christian or Jewish, whether you're believer or unbeliever, doesn't matter whether you're black or white, doesn't matter whether you're conservative or liberal. We're going to raise tough questions for you and for ourselves. We're going to be uncomfortable too. We're going to challenge you, and we're going to invite you as our students to challenge us, because that's how you learn. That's the point. See, our focus is on learning, getting to the truth of things. That's why our book is entitled Truth Matters. We think it's really important to get at the truth of things. But the only way you can get at the truth of things is by allowing your convictions, no matter how deeply you hold them, no matter how central they are to your identity, to be challenged, to be subjected to criticism.
And I apologize for doing this, but what's your definition of truth? And can't a conviction be a truth?
Well,
Can't
conviction can be true or false,
truth?
but it's not true just by being your conviction. See, Cornel and I are pushing back against this modern relativistic idea that you have your truth and I have my truth. No, we're interested in getting at the truth. And what is the truth? It is belief in line with reality. We believe that as harsh as reality may be, it's better to be in touch with reality than to believe something that's not the case, to believe something that it's not truth. We're not happy with comfortable falsehoods. We'd rather know the truth, even if it unsettles us, even if it makes us uncomfortable. We'd rather line our lives up with the truth, even if it's an unhappy truth or an unsettling truth. So no, we don't accept the idea that there's your truth and my truth. Now, at the same time, while we believe there's such a thing as an objective truth, and it matters, and we need to get to it, there's another part of the equation, and that's this. Every single one of us on this entire planet is fallible. We are, as Cornel said a moment ago, frail, fallible, fallen human beings. And that means we're never going to get it completely right. We'll never know the whole truth. And whatever truth we grasp, we'll have it admixed with a certain amount of error. Every single one of us right now on this entire planet has some true beliefs in his head and also has some false beliefs in his head. And it's that intellectual humility that comes from the recognition that we are fallible that should lead us to be open to the challenges from other people, even to our most sacredly held views, the views that are absolutely sacred to us. Cornel and I take the position in our seminars and in our lives that there is no view we hold, no matter how deeply we hold it, that we want to have immunized from critique. If you've got critique, if you've got reasons you think we're wrong about, say, our Christian convictions, very central to both of our identities, but if you think we're wrong, we don't want you to stay silent about it. If we're wrong, we want to know we're wrong. Give us your reasons. Let us evaluate them. Let us decide whether, in fact, they're compelling or not compelling. And that's our message to our students.
Cornel is a truth seeker. He's the kind of scholar who has not fallen so deeply in love with his opinions that he values them over truth.
Well, that's my dear Robbie paying me a high compliment.
Telling the truth.
But I fall short. You know, Samuel Beckett says, try again, fail better. Try again, fail better. That's the best we do as human beings. We're fallible. Therefore, we ought to be humble, but it doesn't mean we're not tenacious in what convictions we do have. You see? And by tenacious, it means willing to sacrifice, willing to take a risk, willing to pay a cost, which means it will never be a question of just how much status or position or money we have determining what we think. That we're always, as Christians, we're in the world but not of it. We're cutting against the grain in that sense. We're not conformed but transformed by something bigger than us. And the truth, capital T, is something that none of us have a monopoly on. But we can have partial dimensions, aspects, facets, characteristics of that truth as fallen human beings that still lead us to live lives that we believe have deep conviction and, in the end, integrity and honesty.
I think it's safe to say that in many ways you have lived your life out loud.
That's true.
How many times have you run for president? How many times have you been arrested?
Oh, that's a good question. I've given up counting the number of times I've been arrested, my dear brother.
But I always...
And my brother's always willing to pay the bail. I said, no, we won't. Don't you worry about it. Don't you worry about it. But he's always willing to do that. But no, I've just run for president once, but I've been running for justice in Jesus ever since I was 7 years old.
What happened at 7?
Oh, I had a very deep experience. I really did. Right there at Shiloh Baptist Church on the chocolate side of Sacramento, California, Reverend Willie P. Cook preaching that sermon and hit me so hard, and I accepted Jesus as my Savior, and I intend to be faithful unto death. That was 65 years ago. 65 years ago, and I'm still trying to follow Jesus, wanting to be that finite follower and that disciplined disciple, falling on my face but bouncing back.
Robert George, you tell a story in here, in your book, Truth Matters, about Cornel West attending services at your Catholic church with you, and it wasn't quite the same.
He read his text closely. He read it closely.
Well, I'll tell you that story. So it involves our seminar. We were teaching that week St. Augustine's Confessions, 1 week. And there was a young lady in the class who I noticed as we were discussing the confessions was weeping. She was weeping. And so when we got to our seminar break, I took her aside and I said, Julia, is something wrong? I see that you were crying. And she said, no, she said, there's nothing wrong. It's just that I've wanted this kind of education my entire life. I've wanted to think about ideas like this. And this is the first time I've really had that experience. And it's just very moving for me to be engaging with St. Augustine in this way. Well, that was very satisfying to me. And I, of course, told Cornel about it. Well, here, a few months later, she came to me and said, you know, Professor George, I've decided I want to be received into the Catholic Church. And I said, well, that's lovely to hear, Julia. What brought you around to that conviction? And she said, well, it began with reading St. Augustine's Confessions. And that got me reading other classic texts in the Christian tradition. And she said, this is where I feel I'm being led. So it was both she and her sister, actually, who were being received into the Catholic Church. And she did me the honor, both of them did me the honor of asking me to be their godfather. So they also invited Cornel to come along to the ceremony, the Easter Vigil that year at the Trenton Cathedral, Trenton, New Jersey Cathedral, where they were being received into the church. And we had a wonderful time. Of course, it was very hard to get to our seats because this is Trenton, New Jersey. And when the folks in the congregation saw Cornel West walk in, they just converged on him and taking photographs, and we had a hard time getting up to the front to sit in our pews. But then the ceremony began, and The bishop, of course, was presiding, and the Easter Vigil was a 2.5 hour or 3 hour
The smells and the
ceremony with
bells.
lots of incense
yes.
and lots of chanting and beautiful singing and so forth and so on. At one point, Cornel leaned over to me and whispered in my ear. He said, "You know, Brother Robbie, I'm a Baptist. We're just a little rowboat. I feel like I'm on a great ocean liner here." And then when the point in the service came, when the bishop called up the catechumens, as they were called, the people who were about to be received into the church, to come up to the altar and kneel before him. He's there with his bishop's mitre and his crozier to officially be received into the church. I got up with Julia and then her sister to go up. And Cornel whispered in my ear, he said, "Can I come too?" And I said, "Certainly, Brother Cornel, you come with me." So I put my hand on one shoulder, and Cornel put his hand on the other shoulder, and the bishop looked up and saw Cornel and me, and he gave us both a big old smile, and he made the sign of the cross and received the young ladies one by one into the Catholic Church. We did have a wonderful time.
It was a beautiful
yeah.
moment.
And then by then it was well past midnight, and the girls insisted that we go with them to the PJ's Pancake House, where we stayed for till 3 in the morning. We were too old for this, but that's where we were on the Easter Vigil night.
And C-SPAN's Q&A podcast continues in a moment.
How does faith play into truth? Is the Catholic Church the truth?
Well, as a Catholic, yes, I believe that. But I also believe, and this is a matter of Catholic teaching, that the Catholic Church does not have a monopoly on the truth. In the document Nostra Aetate of the Second Vatican Council, the Catholic Church proclaims that we affirm all that is true and holy, all that is good and holy in the other traditions of faith, meaning not only the other Christian denominations like the Eastern Orthodox churches and the Protestant churches, but also the great Jewish tradition, the mother faith of the Christian faith from which Christianity emerged. And of course, the Muslim tradition, which honors one God, the God of Abraham. But not just that. The document goes on, again, Nostra Aetate, to talk about the truths that are to be found in the great Eastern traditions of Buddhism and Hinduism. And it goes into some detail about the ways in which these traditions bring powerful, great spiritual resources to their people. So again, from a Catholic point of view, the fullness of truth subsists in the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. But that doesn't mean that there is no truth outside the Catholic faith.
Cornel West, what is it about Chekhov that attracts you? And who was Anton Chekhov?
Yeah, Anton Chekhov was one of the great literary figures, not just of the Russian tradition, but of the modern European tradition with Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and Leskov and Turgenev. In many ways, he's the culminating figure of that golden age of the Russian writers who were the greatest novelistic writers of all modern time. Chekhov himself was a medical doctor. He died at 44. He's coughing up blood at the age of 27. He's giving free services to the poor during the day, and he's writing some of the most magnificent plays at night, from The Seagull, The Cherry Archer, and Uncle Vanya. The greatest play of all, I think, The Three Sisters. It had 8,000 characters of hundreds and hundreds of short stories. And what was it about Chekhov? Absolute condemnation of no one, absolute compassion for everyone. So that here he was a Darwinian, here he was secular, here he was an agnostic. He is shaped by the Russian Orthodox Church. He could go to the church, and as we note in the book, he would see the magnificent stories of Jesus and say, "Oh, it's just too beautiful to be true, but I want to enact it to the degree to which I can." And that kind of commitment to love and compassion and justice and care for others is at the center of who he was, even though he was not a Christian. So even myself as a Christian fundamentally identify with the love in his literary artistry, and yet at the same time, recognize that I come down differently. I remain in the Christian tradition. Now, when you all talked about the church, you see, I would argue that Jesus Christ is the truth, and churches make Jesus available to others. So no church would anyway really have the truth. The church makes available that truth in the rich Catholic tradition that could go all the way from Peter to Augustine, all the way up to Robert George, Mother Teresa, and so forth and so on. St. Francis of Assisi. Oh, no, but Catholics are Catholics. Now we Baptists, everybody got to say. And we got some rich Baptists that go back from Thomas Munzer to Reverend C.L. West, my grandfather. So that all of us have a equal status, but we have an access to a truth that was fleshified and concretized in the word that was dwelling among us, who was that Jesus. Now people could look at us and say, oh, you know, that rich Judaic tradition, they got some magnificent folk. How come they didn't choose Hillel as opposed to Jesus? Hillel's magnificent. I can talk about Baal Shem Tov, overflowing with love, founder of the Hasidic tradition that would produce a Rabbi Heschel. That's a great tradition, no doubt about it. But for those of us who zero in on that Jesus of Nazareth, the churches then make the story, the life, the deeds, the miserable death, and the magnificent resurrection of Jesus available to us. Would you agree with that formulation?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The within the Catholic tradition, the theological tradition, there's a concept of implicit faith. And you look at a figure like Chekhov, and there are many others like this, and you think, well, they are acting the faith, even if they're not professing the faith. So in a certain sense, there's an implicit faith. Now, I wouldn't want to say that in a way that would insult somebody like Chekhov and make him say, "No, wait a minute, you're turning me into a Christian, and you know, you don't have any right to turn me into a Christian." And yet, implicitly, he is enacting what I try to
live.
Profess. Yeah, and you know, he may very well be enacting it much better than I am.
Lonergan had a notion of anonymous Christians.
That was Ronner.
That's Ronner, though. That's Carl. That's Carl Ronner.
That's Carl Ronner. Well, they were very similar, Ronner and Lonergan, both Jesuits, both writing at the same time.
Right.
First half of the 20th century.
That anonymous Christian implicit faith.
That implicit faith.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
I mean, you know, it's not that sort of God forgets about everybody but those who are in this particular category over here as counting as Christians. The belief of Christians is that God loves everybody equally. He's not favoring one group over another. Now Calvinists might have a somewhat different view about this with their concepts of election and predestination and so forth and so on. We get into the complications there, but certainly speaking, you know, for the Catholic
side, all of us have hybridity in our traditions and access to a variety of different traditions. I mean, I don't exist without Malcolm X. Now, Malcolm's father was a Baptist minister, Reverend Earl Little, but he became a Muslim. I don't exist without John Coltrane. Now, Coltrane begins as an AME Zion, but we don't know where Coltrane ends up. He's in interstellar space, but the love supreme is flowing all the time. You know what I mean? So in that sense, Robbie's right. You know, we have to be open to a variety of different influences, insights, forms of wisdom, and so on, without them necessarily being part of our particular group.
Well, go all the way back to the Middle Ages. I mean, there's no central figure to Catholic thinking about religious matters than Aquinas, Thomas Aquinas, where he's being influenced by some of the great Muslim thinkers of his era, Jewish thinkers like Maimonides. I myself have been influenced by people like the late Chief Rabbi of Britain, Jonathan Sachs, who was a dear friend, but also someone who deeply influenced me. I know the impact that Abraham Joshua Heschel's work has had on you, or Bonhoeffer, who's influenced both of us.
Absolutely.
Cornel West, why do you think conservatives seem to appreciate C.S. Lewis?
You know, I think that anytime we use a term like conservative or liberal or leftist and so forth, none of these terms designate a homogeneous unit or a monolithic group. You see? Because I never want conservatives to have a monopoly on conserving the best. Because I'm in the business of preserving and conserving the best. You see? So if I'm trying to preserve Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or Fannie Lou Hamer or John Coltrane, and they say, well, you got to be a conservative to conserve them. I said, says who? Plato and Aristotle are full of so many different riches and ways of engaging the world. Why would conservatives have a monopoly on them? You see? So in that sense, I do think in our present moment that conservatives tend to be those who are committed to what the great G.K. Chesterton called the democracy of the dead rather than the oligarchy of the quick and the living. Because there's a sense in which so many people want to turn away from the dead, turn away from history, turn away from the past, turn away from heritage. Let's just talk to the folk who are alive because the past was so bad. The past had so many crimes. The past had so many atrocities. And I would say, just look around in the present. You don't see crimes. You don't see atrocities. You don't see barbarities. You think that the present, the living, the quick can even survive without their connection to the dead? What is your relation to your grandmama? What is your relation to your granduncle who you love so deeply and who is now gone? Don't they still live in many ways in your life? Isn't part of their afterlife at work in your life? Oh, that's a good point, brother. Does that make you a conservative? No, not in the narrow sense. But in the deeper sense, we're all shaped by the best of the past and the present. And we hope to authorize a better future.
The brother sure sounded like a conservative to me. You're welcome anytime, Brother Cornel.
All right, C.S. Lewis.
C.S. Lewis is a complicated, interesting, profound guy. And everybody, whether you're liberal, conservative, whether you're socialist or libertarian, has something to learn from C.S. Lewis.
Yes,
I would begin with The Abolition of Man. We've taught that one.
Yeah, we've taught that
one. The Abolition of Man. What does it mean to be human? Can we put that humanity at risk? Can we lose our humanity? Can we reduce ourselves to rough beasts? Absolutely we can. The historical record is filled with human beings doing that. We are capable of the sublime. This is basically Lewis's teaching. We're capable of the sublime because we're made in the very image and likeness of God. And yet, we mere mortal creatures are frail and fallen and fallible, and we can reduce ourselves to the condition of brute animals. And that manifests itself in the way we treat ourselves and the way we treat other people. So the message that we're trying to promote, very much in line with C.S. Lewis's thinking, is humanity is a precious thing that's got to be cultivated and held up and maintained. It's not a given once and for all. It all depends on our values, our virtues, our willingness to live up to the high moral standards that human beings are called to live up to, even though in our frail and fallen condition, we very often, all of us, fail to live up to.
Robert George, you are the McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton University. That sounds pretty fancy.
Guilty as charged, I'm afraid. Yes, my area is philosophy of law. I wrestle with the question of what is law, why do we have law, what is the alternative to being governed by law, how does law relate to other normative systems in society, what is the relationship between law and morality, how do we distinguish good laws from bad laws, just laws from unjust laws. This is the question that Martin Luther King presents in Letter from Birmingham Jail. My field is very closely connected to the related fields of moral and political philosophy, and I teach in those fields as well.
Who was Mr. McCormick? And I presume it was a Mr.
Yes, it was. You remember the Mechanical Reaper? It's that McCormick. His family, after his death, endowed the McCormick Professorship of Jurisprudence at Princeton for a man who was a professor in the Department of Politics at that time, whose name was Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson was the first McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence. He held it, I believe, until he became president of the university a few years later. And then a few years after that, he became governor of New Jersey. I think that was 1910, if I recall correctly. And then only 2 years later, served only 2 years as governor, and then was elected president of the United States. And then he was followed by a succession of luminary legal scholars until I took the thing and it all went to hell in a handbasket. But I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best to uphold the great tradition.
Cornel West, there's a new biography out on Woodrow Wilson. It's by Chris Cox, longtime Republican congressman from California. He takes on Wilson on his misogyny and his racism, and he focuses on those two areas. Should there be a Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton?
Well, we made the argument in 1974, and I was a graduate student there with Henry Coleman, and dear brother Larry Morse, and Greg, and others, Zakazi, and others, saying that we should have a public forum to have a sense of who Woodrow Wilson was, shaped by his roots in Virginia, progressive in terms of his critiques of corporations, which I agree with, right? He also was highly suspicious of the eating clubs on Prospect Avenue,
Trying to get rid of
which I agree with up until my daughter became a member, and so I had to kind of rethink these things. No,
His daughter's a very good influence. My niece is a very good influence.
We love her and others. But just to have a public discussion about it. Because
And this is 1974.
This is 74, but we couldn't pull it off. They weren't interested at all. Now, when they eliminated Woodrow Wilson's name completely with no discussion whatsoever, I still wasn't happy, because it's brute force, because it's just raw might. I believe in persuasion. I don't believe in raw might, even when it agrees with me. The process and the means are important as the end and the goal. And so Woodrow Wilson, white supremacist, resegregated Washington, resegregated DC, seduced the great W.B. Du Bois to support him, and then betrayed him, and so forth and so on. And politicians betray intellectuals all the time. And so we have to acknowledge that as well. But we needed to have a serious, robust conversation, a Socratic engagement as to who this man really was. And he was not a demon. He was not a devil. He was a human being I had deep, deep disagreements with. I'm not pro Jim Crow, and you talking about my grandmama and granddad and others, right? But at the same time, he also had some views that I can resonate with. How do we keep track of each other's humanity rather than simply have a Manichaean view and think that he's all negative, all evil, and somehow I'm all good and I'm pure? No, not at all.
I can tell you a story about this.
Very quickly, you used the phrase Manichaean perspective.
Yes.
What's Manichaean?
Manichaean is a view that there's a kingdom of light and there's a kingdom of darkness. All the good is on one side, all the evil is on the other. No self-criticism, viewing oneself as pure, reinforcing self-righteousness, which is a form of spiritual emptiness.
And I apologize for interrupting.
Not at all. So the morning, I think it was a morning, but the day in any case, that Princeton announced that it was removing the name Woodrow Wilson from the famous Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs and renaming it simply the School of Public and International Affairs, I got a call from Cornel West. Cornel was calling me to express his disagreement with the decision that had just been made, because he said what the university did here was simply capitulate to pressure. It wasn't making its decision based on reasoned argument and judgment. It was capitulating to pressure, allowing itself to be intimidated by political activists. And that speaks all you really need to know about Cornel West. He's interested in getting at the truth of the thing, not in necessarily winning by any means necessary.
Should they have removed the name in your view?
I think they shouldn't have, and I'll give you some background there. So when I became McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence and became Wilson's successor, with several in between, so this was 1999. I think it was fair to say at that point, I was the most critical member of at least most outspokenly critical member of the Princeton faculty about Woodrow Wilson, objecting not only to his racism and especially his resegregating the workforce, federal workforce in Washington, D.C., but also to his building of the administrative state, which I think undermines, as he well knew, by the way, undermines some core Madisonian constitutional principles. I was surprised when a few years later, I found myself in the unusual position of defending him, because I objected to this new trend of simply canceling historical figures who didn't think the way we think today because of their political or philosophical opinions. I think that's a species of what historians sometimes call presentism, that we're judging people not by the standards of their day, but by the standards of our day. And as Cornel said a moment ago, someday people are going to look at the standards of our day with the same critical eye that we look at the standards of past times and places. I knew that Woodrow Wilson's name was attached to the Woodrow Wilson School, not because he was a racist, though he was. It was attached to the Woodrow Wilson School for two reasons. One, his efforts in international affairs, his efforts, for example, to establish an international body, the League of Nations. We didn't get it. Later we got the United Nations. Now we can have a good debate about whether the United Nations has done any good. We can have a good debate about whether it's done a lot of harm. But Wilson's name was on the building in part because of his efforts to establish a kind of lasting basis for international peace through international cooperation. Number two, because he built Princeton University into a major research university. He took it from being a good, small liberal arts college, which is basically what it was, to being a great research university. He looked across the ocean at the great universities of his time. They were in Germany, especially places like Berlin, and Heidelberg and Tübingen. And he said, we can do that here. And he made Princeton University into a truly great university. And that's why his name was on the building. So it seemed to me, given that we were not honoring his racism, we were honoring his achievements, that there was no reason to take the name off.
In Truth Matters, you both talk about the, quote, highly professionalized, commodified, corporatized academy. And those sound like words that probably originated with Cornel West.
That's true.
What does that mean?
It means that the universities began to worship the golden calves of money, reputation, using businesses as a model for education, so that the presidents began to behave more like CEOs rather than Socratic figures, trying to facilitate a high quality engagement with great texts that would shape their hearts, minds, and souls for them to be forces for good, to use the language of John Coltrane. And so that's what corporatism, commodification, commercialized, and obsessed with reputation in the narrow sense, rather than paideia in the deep, deep sense that we were talking about it before. Deep education, not market-driven schooling. And I've seen it happen. I've been in the academy now for almost 50 years. And 50 years ago, I don't want to be nostalgic about it because, of course, it was deeply sexist. It was deeply racist. They had just gotten over the vicious quotas against Jews. You hardly had any international students for the most part, but you still had professors who had a conception of themselves not as professionals selling their ware, but as inquirers who were trying to engage in serious discussion about the past and the present. And we've lost a lot of that, and that's part of the spiritual bankruptcy and part of the moral vacuity of so much of higher education in America that Trump and others make much of. And I think they're wrong in their reasons, but they've got enough to talk about because the universities have brought so much of this upon themselves.
Every year, U.S. News and World Report issues its ranking of the colleges and the law schools and the medical schools and everything else. Very lucrative for U.S. News and World Report. It's made U.S. News and World Report what it is today. Every year, Princeton, at least every year for the past 25 years or so, Princeton has been the #1 university. All right, great. I'm sure a lot of students apply to Princeton. We get a lot of great kids because we're ranked #1 above Harvard and Stanford and MIT and so forth. But I don't want students coming to Princeton because we're ranked #1 on the U.S. News and World Reports. I want students coming to Princeton because they want to engage in serious challenging, intellectual argumentation and debate. I want them to come to Princeton University because they want to live the life of the mind. I want them to come to Princeton University because they know their most fundamental beliefs will be challenged and they'll be forced to think their way to their conclusions. In short, just to go back to the word Cornel used, I want them to want to come to Princeton University because we offer paideia. Now, we're not quite there. You know, a lot of what goes on at our university is good, but we're not quite at the point where I can genuinely say that we represent at Princeton paideia. I do like to think, maybe this is a little chauvinism on my part, that we're probably better than most of our peer institutions at raising those questions. But we could do much better. And A, I would hope we would do better, and B, I hope that students would want to come, not because of how we're ranked in U.S. News and World Report or any other ranking system, but because they want paideia. They want deep education, not just information, not just skills, because they want to wrestle with the deepest and most important questions.
See, that's the crucial part about quality, not just spectacle. We just lost a giant, Sly Stone. Curtis Mayfield passed 1999. Sam Cooke passed December 11th, 1964. Neither one of those giants won a Grammy. Milli Vanilli won 2.
Yeah, there you go.
I ain't got nothing against Milli Vanilli, but we understand he's no giant. Don't get caught with the title and the spectacle. We want substance. We want quality. So it ought to be in education too. It's not who's number one based on some U.S. News Report criteria. No, not at all. Not at all. That were the case, Charlie Parker would have been forgot about, and Glenn Miller would have been the hero of jazz. I ain't got nothing against Glenn. I ain't got nothing against Vanilla Brothers in jazz, but Glenn Miller would be the first one to get down on his knees when Charlie Parker came in and played Cherokee, because it was quality. That's the key.
I'm scared to put a label on because of what you said earlier, but is it lonely for you, Professor George at Princeton, being a conservative?
Not anymore. It was a bit lonely when I first arrived. There weren't a lot of us out of the closet at the time, but there's a larger number now. I don't know if it's just that we brought them out of the closet or we brought them in from the outside. But on our faculty of maybe something between 800 and 1,000, I guess, I can think of something maybe 23, 24, 25 out of the closet conservative professors of different descriptions. And while that in absolute terms is still a pretty small number when you're talking about 800 or 1,000 members of the faculty, it's a lot better than it was, and it's a lot better than what you find at other places. I do think high quality education requires that there be a significant range of viewpoint diversity. Cornel and I think, are able to offer in our courses together a much better educational experience because students are hearing different perspectives from people who actually hold those perspectives. Now, both of us, when we're teaching on our own, strive. We really do our best to represent competing points of view fairly. But I still find that it is much better when I'm not relying on my own sympathetic rendering of the progressive point of view, but they're actually hearing it from Cornel, and I suspect that it works the same
and it works
the other
same
direction.
Way. I mean, you think of Neil Ferguson, Thomas Sowell, Harvey Manfield. These are crucial voices in the culture in their own disciplines. Gerald Horn, Farrah Jasmine Griffin. We can go on and on and on. Supposedly on the other side of the ideological spectrum, their voices indispensable in any high quality conversation in the quest for truth and beauty and goodness.
Dr. West, for $90,000 a year, are students in the Ivy League getting their money's worth?
No, I don't think they are.
Well, you've been paying that $90,000 for St. Jude's education.
I know, but I make sure she's got her Goethe and Schiller and Rabelais and Shakespeare and Dante working too. And we haven't even got to Tagore yet. But as a parent, I'm able to make sure that she's getting the kind of quality education, because parents play a role here too. You can't put it all at the feet of professors or a university, you see. But no, I don't think that any of these universities are shaping the young people in the way in which they ought, given the money that they're paying for. It's just too much money.
I want to go back to something I said earlier. I think our fundamental task, if we're going to fulfill our vocation, especially as teachers as well as scholars, if we're going to fulfill our vocation as teachers, then we have to understand our fundamental task is to form the young men and women entrusted to our charge to be determined truth seekers and courageous truth speakers. If we're to come anywhere near doing that, then we're going to have to confront them with the following. There are some things that matter, that are important, but they don't ultimately matter. They matter, but not all that much. What are those things? Wealth, power, status, influence, prestige, celebrity, those kinds of things. Those
Which
aren't
you
bad.
both have.
Well, we have them, but they're not bad in themselves.
I don't have a whole lot.
Not a lot of wealth.
I got
either.
spiritual wealth. I got a whole lot of what money can't buy. But I don't have a whole lot of money. But you go right on.
But the thing that I want to call attention to here is that those things, though not bad in themselves, because after all, you can do good with them. If you have wealth, you can create products that people need, build businesses, give people jobs. If you accumulate a lot of wealth, you can be charitable and be a philanthropist and give money to very worthy causes. Nothing against that at all. Same with celebrity, same with influence.
Yeah.
You can do good things with them. So those things aren't bad in themselves, but they're not good in themselves either. They're not the things that ultimately matter. They're instrumentally valuable. That is, they're valuable as means to other ends. They're not valuable in themselves. The things that really matter are the things that are valuable in themselves. Faith, family, friendship, knowledge, beauty, integrity, honor, decency. The things that we want not as means to other ends, but things we intelligibly want for their own sake, for the enrichment that they bring to human lives. And our fundamental task, I think, is to get our students to actually wrestle with the question, what matters, but not all that much, and what ultimately matters.
Yes.
The focus so often as you're building your resume, you got into the fancy kindergarten in New York City, and then the Dalton School, and then maybe to Andover or Choate, and then to Princeton, and then to Harvard Law School, and then to Cravath, Swaine and Moore, or Supreme Court clerkship. The kids are so focused, my students in any event, are so focused on those kinds of things that they can lose sight of the things that are really, at the end of the day, much more important than that. We want our students to think not so much about what's going to go on my CV as what's going to go on my tombstone. On your tombstone, it doesn't say summa cum laude Princeton, partner Cravath, Swaine and Moore, Supreme Court clerk. It says loyal husband, loving father, devoted son. Those are the things that really matter.
And C-SPAN's Q&A podcast continues in a moment.
To go back to something that you said, Cornel West, you're a best-selling author. Race Matters, Democracy Matters, etc., etc. There's a lot of money in best-selling books.
Yeah, but I got a lot of love flowing from loved ones and others, where that money could be directed as opposed to me keeping that money. You know what I mean? And so, because money doesn't mean that much to me, seek ye first the kingdom of God, the beloved community, those things that money can't buy, the love, the service, and so forth. That's always been the major priority. So yes, I've had money flowing through. It just has not been retained because it went in a number of different directions. Absolutely.
How did Race Matters change your life?
Well, it did, though. Deb Chaseman, who came up with the idea from Beacon Press, she put the essays together. I only wrote one new essay for that. But it was Irving Howe and Michael Walzer in Dissent, and it was Sheila Ben Habib and Praxis International and other journals that I just brought those texts together. And once the text came out, it was really Rodney King and the rebellion, the mass rebellion in Los Angeles, because the timing was such that the whole nation was focused on the vicious legacy of white supremacy and the policing and so forth, making the connection to slavery, Jim Crow lynching and so forth. And they wanted a broader discussion. And my text just happened to drop in that way. So I said to myself, you know, here's God using a cracked vessel like me who's trying to love my crooked neighbor with my crooked heart, and maybe my text can be a force for good at this particular moment. And that's what happened. Boom. Next thing, all the magazines and so forth. You say, well, no, this is my 9th book. I've been writing a whole lot of other things. It's almost an accident that it was put together. But if the Lord wants to use it in that way, I say, let's go with it.
Is that your best-selling book of all time?
I think it is. You're absolutely right. 1993.
I have a question for Brother Cornel. I've never asked you before.
Mm-hmm.
The inspiration for the pun in the title, Race Matters, which is, of course, a play on words. It's that race matters in the sense of, it's something that really matters. And race matters in the sense that this pertains to race. I'm wondering if the inspiration was Peter Geach's famous book, the philosopher Peter Geach's famous book, Logic Matters. Logic Matters.
Yeah.
Were you thinking of it?
No, I know Geach, of course, but no, I never was. It was Sister Deb Chasman that came up with the title.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Mm-hmm. She came up with the title. Then we built on it with Democracy Matters. Now we got Truth Matters. Absolutely.
I was told by somebody yesterday that I told them that we were going to sit down and have a chat. And he said, great, but can you get them to disagree or fight? Is this, and I don't mean to be disdainful, but is this a bromance? Is this a road show in a sense, the two of you, who maybe don't agree on everything, but get up on stage and it's a show?
Well, I don't think so for this reason. What you hear now is what you would hear if you were secretly recording a conversation in my living room or at Cornel's dinner table with his beautiful wife, Anahita. We talk the same way.
Oh, no, it's true. With Sister Cindy, too.
In public.
Have you ever had a fight?
Oh, sure. We fight over abortion. We got a whole host of issues that we fight over. We disagree, but it's not it's not a ugly kind of thing. We just disagree, and I try to get in his skin. He tries to get in my skin. But I'll tell you this, because you remember those moments in Shakespeare's Hamlet where he talks about acting. You got 3 different forms of acting. Well, we are a show if you understand it as a James Brown concert, where we are real, coming from our hearts and minds and souls and emptying ourselves to give to the audience. But it's not a show if it's just posing, posturing, acting like we're something that we're really not. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's absolutely fair. So we've never had a harsh word between the two of us.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, we've been doing this for 20-something years, right? And we've never had a harsh word because we trust each other's good faith to the core. We have always had a relationship of love and affection and trust, and but if you talk about disagreement about issues, just look at the book. You can go in the book and you'll see us disagreeing about all sorts of things, religious matters, political matters. We have quite a lively debate in the book about whether Christianity involves a leap of faith. Cornel tends to see things in Kierkegaardian terms. That at the end of the day, reason runs out, and you can't really decide where you stand on religious questions without a leap of faith. And I resist that because I'm a sort of Thomist. I'm an old-fashioned Thomist, and it seems to me we fundamentally reason our way to our positions, even in matters of religion.
Have you attended a Baptist service?
I have, but not with Brother Cornel. He hasn't taken me to one yet.
He's been in Pentecostal, our precious Pentecostal traditions too.
Yes, I have.
Eugene Rivers.
I've been in Baptist churches. I've been in Kojic churches, Church of God in Christ, Pentecostal churches, Assemblies of God. I grew up in the hills of West Virginia. I grew up around what we didn't use the term in those days, but what we would today call evangelicals, and I have a great love for that tradition and many dear friends. I was very close to the late Charles Colson, who was a great evangelical leader. He and I did so many little, and sometimes not so little, projects together. I've learned from so many people outside my own tradition. I referred earlier to the great Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs.
Oh, yeah.
Chuck Colson is another person. Albert Mohler at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary is another person. Sheikh Hamza Yusuf.
With our precious Muslim brothers and sisters. Robbie plays a serious banjo and bluegrass tradition. Now, Catholicism is not known for being on the cutting edge of playing banjos in bluegrass. You know he's got some deep Protestant Southern roots in it. That's part of the hybridity of all of us, if we're really honest about it.
And I especially love bluegrass gospel.
That's true. That's true.
Back to Truth Matters. I know that the best way the two of us can get at the truth of things is to get some time together. Pour me a nice red Bordeaux, pour him a nice glass of cognac, and let's get to work on trying to figure this thing out. Who was talking there?
That was me.
Yeah, that's Brother Robbie.
He drinks the cognac. I like the red Bordeaux.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, what I'm referring to there is simply this. When we converse, even about the deep matters on which we disagree, we are not out to persuade each other. I don't see my goal as winning him over to my side. No, my goal is the same as his goal, and that is to get at the truth of the thing. If I'm wrong, I don't want to persuade him. If he's got reasons why I'm wrong, I'd rather him persuade me. The key thing is to get at the truth. It's not persuasion. Persuasion is a game. You know, persuasion aims at victory. I'm not interested in victory, nor is he. We're interested in truth. So proceeding dialectically, him giving the reasons that led him to a certain position, me giving the reasons that led me to an opposite position, and then our engaging with each other's reasoning, evaluating it, criticizing it, is the way both of us try to get at the truth of things. So at the end of the day, I don't consider that we've wasted our time if we don't arrive at the same conclusion. I consider that we've deepened our knowledge of the truth of the thing. We've gotten at least further down the line toward fully understanding whatever the reality is of the issue that we're discussing.
Cornel West, what do you enjoy most about having a classroom of students?
Oh, I mean, just being able to take the opportunity to collectively engage in wrestling with subject matter and text, because what's at the center of the class is not me or them. It's the subject matter. And what's at the center of the subject matter? Well, it depends on which text it is, but usually in philosophy, you know, it has to do with a certain set of arguments or stories or narratives or ways of generating insight and wisdom to deal with this aspect of what it means to be human, that aspect of what it means to be human. And it solicits something that's bigger inside of all of us, because that subject matter is bigger than all of us. And people have been wrestling with that subject matter for thousands and thousands of years, and will be, unless we got nuclear holocaust, unless we have ecological holocaust and we're not around anymore. But we just know you're part of something that's bigger than you. It's like Chekhov's great short story, The Student. The continuity of that long past, that deep present, and the unknown, incomplete present that leads toward a future. And to allow the students to come into that arena is a beautiful thing. It's a Kairos moment, actually. It really is.
Is the Union Theological Seminary connected with a denomination?
Well, it used to be Presbyterian. We broke from Princeton Seminary.
Which was also Presbyterian.
Which is Presbyterian, going back to our precious Scottish brothers and sisters. So it's a Scottish version of Presbyterianism. You know, Presbyterianism is not monolithic either. It's not homogeneous and monolithic either. But it's the Witherspoons and others who came to Princeton. And then when we broke, we moved to New York City, so we were going to be urban. And then with Reinhold Niebuhr and Paul Tillich and Wilhelm Pauck and Beverly Harrison and James Cone and Gary Dorian and others, Union became so many ways the great prophetic seminary in the American empire. And under Serene Jones for the last 17 years, you know, we've been trying to, she's my president, we've been trying to keep that tradition alive.
I think Bonhoeffer was there briefly.
Bonhoeffer spent 1930-31. Adam Clayton Powell Jr. was, of course, a student there. Bonhoeffer was a member of Adam Clayton Powell Sr.'s church. He was the only vanilla brother in the chocolate church in 1931, preaching, teaching, and then went back to Germany. And when he founded the underground seminary, he brought the Negro spirituals, and he brought the great black thinkers with him. in his anti-Nazi, anti-fascist prophetic praxis. So again, he's learning, he's forever absorbing in that way. He learned from the Irish and the Spanish as well, and was writing to Gandhi in India, corresponding with Gandhi, planning to go to India, but couldn't make it.
Where's your church home today?
My church home today is on the move. In many ways, it's still Shiloh Baptist Church. In some ways, it's Metropolitan Baptist Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is where my grandfather pastored. I haven't been there in years, but my soul is there all the time. But if I really want to get a chance to spend some time, I steal away in one of the small churches in Harlem, different ones all the time.
One of the small ones.
Yes, because that's that kind of old gut bucket, rich, sophisticated, funky gospel. It gets it to your heart and your body and your soul. You can feel it. And it's hard to get that these days. I had that when I was growing up, but it's hard to get that because the church has been commodified, corporatized, pastors are CEOs, and the blood at the cross becomes Kool-Aid, something you just dip into rather than have your life transformed. The prayer becomes a prayer, gimme, 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 praying for a blessing rather than praying to be a blessing to others. That's a tradition I come out of with Shiloh Baptist. And you got to go got to search hard to find those kind of churches nowadays.
I think I saw a statistic that Americans, it's only 65% who now consider themselves Christian. I might be a little on the low
way
side,
down from
but
what it
it's
was 20
declining
years ago,
as is organized religion membership.
It seems to have hit a plateau, but that's after a precipitous drop over the past 20 years. One very interesting, relatively recent phenomenon is that there's been an increase of religiosity among younger people. That is your 18 to 25 group, not your 25 to 35, your 18 to 25. And it's led for the first time in polling history by young men rather than young women. Traditionally, especially among younger people, but more generally, there's been greater religiosity among women than among men. So this is an unusual development, and we'll see what comes of it. I think David Brooks has written about it. Certainly Ross Douthat has written about it. There's a good deal of commentary out there these
Converts
days.
to Catholicism.
Well, Douthat is. I think Brooks is I believe Brooks is an evangelical.
I'm just thinking about among the number of the younger people.
Oh yeah, there's
themselves.
been a big. I mean, at my own church, just this past week, it was the ceremony for the catechumens, and I was stunned by the enormous number of young adult converts who were coming into the church. At a certain point in the mass, they had everybody actually stand up, and there was a little bit of a ritual, kind of blessing of the catechumens. And I mean, my goodness, there must have been, just our little parish in Princeton must have been 40 or 45 of them.
Yeah,
I was stunned.
No,
but that's part of a national and indeed international phenomenon.
Yeah. I mean, if the choice, to put it very crudely, is between so much of the narcissism and hedonism of so-called secular life, which is market-driven, versus the authority of the church, in this case, the authority of Catholicism, you're going to get even more converts to Catholicism, converts to religion in general. And I'm sure it's probably happening in the Islamic tradition with young people choosing to become Muslims rather than narcissists and hedonists. And unfortunately, you don't have the middle range anymore. I mean, there was a time in which to be a secular person meant that you could be as moral or more moral than Christians. Because, I mean, the YMCA didn't desegregate until 1946. Communist Party had desegregated when it was founded in 1990. So just on that one issue, you could be secular and communist and on the cutting edge of the race issue in the way in which so many Christians were not. But you still missed out on a lot when you're in the Communist Party on spiritual issues, I would argue. But on that one issue, there's a tradition of the secular world that was still much more morally centered and spiritually focused, and that's been fading away. And a lot of our young people have to make these radical choices with these broad options.
You know, at Princeton, we have a very vibrant traditionalist Jewish chaplaincy. There's the main Jewish chaplaincy That's been there for a long time, and I think it's got a large constituency. But what's really striking is the more orthodox one. It's the one associated with the Chabad movement under our rabbi is a wonderful rabbi, Rabbi Eitan Webb. And he's got a big, that chaplaincy has a big following among Jewish students who enter with, in many cases, a kind of minimal level of Jewish practice, a sort of Jewish identity, but a minimal level of Jewish practice. But before they leave Princeton, they've become much more serious and much more observant within the Jewish tradition. We're seeing the same thing with our very vibrant Catholic chaplains. We have a wonderful chaplain, Father Swantek, and kids come in, with some level of Catholic identity and practice, but they leave with more than they came in with, which is the reverse of what you used to expect at colleges, where kids would come in with a good deal of religion and leave with less observance.
Yeah. Was that your experience? I see that.
But there's something happening out there. I mean, there's something happening. I think it's the search for. It's what Viktor Frankl, the great late Viktor Frankl, called man's search for meaning. It's ineradicable in the human soul. You can put it off for a while. You can obscure it for a while. But we're going to search for meaning.
Oh, yes.
We human beings are going to search for meaning.
Well, in the book, Truth Matters, you talk about this era as an age of feeling.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, you know how the historians are fond of breaking up the epochs into the age of this and the age of that. So some historians tell us, for example, that the medieval period was the age of faith. Now, what do they mean by that? Well, they mean that the touchstone of truth, of goodness, of justice, of right, was conformity with religious doctrine. Now, is that an exaggeration? Yes, it is. But it's not entirely false. Now, the medievals, if you think of figures like Aquinas, Maimonides, some of the great Muslim thinkers, these were certainly people of faith, but they were dedicated to rational inquiry and to rational argumentation. So it's a bit of an exaggeration to just say it's the age of faith, if by that you mean that reason doesn't play an important role. At the same time, there's also some truth in the idea that the Middle Ages were an age of faith. Well, then the historians tell us the Enlightenment, or at least the European Enlightenment, or Enlightenments, plural, that was an age of reason or an age of science. And again, that's not entirely false. It's a bit of an exaggeration if you mean by it that the great Enlightenment figures had all lost any contact with religion. Some of them were very devoutly religious indeed, but there's still truth in it, because it is the case that for the Enlightenment figures, reason really was the touchstone of truth and of goodness and of justice and of right. Well, if the medieval period was the age of faith and the Enlightenment was the age of reason, in what age do we live? What's our epoch? And here our suggestion is, well, ours is the age of feeling, where the touchstone of truth and goodness and right, justice, is not faith or reason, or faith and reason, which is what I tend to think. It's rather feeling. It's how do I feel about something? Feeling is the touchstone of truth. Now, my critique of that, my problem with that is feeling is highly subjective and highly unreliable. Our emotions mislead us so badly. Now, our fallen reason can certainly fail, and we can certainly be wrong in matters of faith, but I still think that faith or reason is a more reliable indicator or pointer to truth than is our subjective emotions, our passions, our desires, our feelings. So I'm concerned about our age putting too much reliance on feeling, because that's precisely what generates misguided ideas like there is no such thing as truth, there's only your truth and my truth. Well, if that's true, then Hitler has his truth and Mother Teresa has her truth, but neither has the truth. I rather think in the debate between, say, Hitler and Mother Teresa about how we should act toward our fellow man, Mother Teresa has the truth, or she's at least darn close, darn sight nearer to it than is Hitler.
Cornel West, the age of feeling.
Well, I agree with what Brother Robbie said in general. I would just want to complicate it a little bit. You know, when the great T.S. Eliot talks about the disassociation of thought and feeling that he sees setting in the 16th century, and metaphysical poets wrestling with that there are conceptions of feeling that are reason informed. there are conceptions of reason that are inseparable from feeling. So Whitehead has a notion of what he calls one-eyed reason and two-eyed reason. One-eyed reason is reason going one way, feeling going another. That's very much what Brother Robbie was rightly talking about. But even Aquinas himself understands that the integral conception, the feeling and reason together. And that has been lost, again, very much owing to the market. You see, the market has been able to manipulate consumers in order to generate products and stories and narratives that flatten things out, that dumb things down. And the cheap feelings are easily manipulatable to generate high profit. Conservative like Eliot, that's what he was in part of talking about, the hollow men, the empty folk, the spiritually vacuous folk. He was right about that. As a great poet and also as a conservative, I reject his program and his response politically. I embrace his genius and his wisdom in terms of his insight about our moment. So when Brother Robbie's talking about the age of feeling, his conception of feeling is very different than that much more richer, deeper, complicated conception of feeling and reason that went hand in hand many centuries before. And again, I think that when we look at the arts, especially when you think of music, you see, music has a way of speaking profoundly to our feelings. Like Mozart, Beethoven, and Bruckner, and Brahms, they touch us at the level of feeling, but it is a deeply reason-informed conception of feeling. The same is true with B.B. King, Aretha Franklin. The same would be true with a Carole King or a Barbra Streisand.
Or a Sarah Vaughan.
Oh, Lord, Sarah Vaughan, you say her name, I'm just going to stop. I dropped the mic.
Is Sarah Vaughan, is John Coltrane, are they philosophers? Should they be taught in a philosophy class?
No, they're not philosophers, but they're great artists. And they have their role to play, including in tutoring the emotions, just as philosophy has its role to play, and sociology has its role to play, and history, of course, has its role to play, and the sciences have their role to play. I think on the one hand, we have to respect the particular methods and ambitions and aspirations and possibilities of the particular disciplines. But on the other hand, I don't want to draw those boundaries too tightly between the disciplines. The disciplines can become silos. So while I respect the difference between, say, the artist and the philosopher and the scientist, I want the philosopher and the scientist and the artist to be in conversation with each other, because they've all got something to contribute to the project of our understanding more deeply what it means to be human and coming to enable us to lead more truly human lives.
Well, I was just blessed to give these Gifford lectures at Edinburgh just last year.
The Nobel
right?
Prize of Philosophy. And
it was called a jazz-soaked philosophy for our catastrophic times, from Socrates to Coltrane. And the question was, well, if you're a philosopher, a lover of wisdom, that it means, in fact, that, lo and behold, that makes Beethoven in many ways is deeper than Hegel. That Ninth Symphony is deeper than the science of logic. Coltrane deeper than John Dewey, not because we anti-Dewey, anti-Hegel, but it's that philosophia at that deeper level of fusing feeling, thought, body, heart, soul, and mind. So I hear what Robbie's saying. You don't want the term to become just promiscuous, it just lies with anything and anybody. But on the other hand, wisdom itself overflows in a variety of different forms. And I think the musicians, the Stevie Wonders are much deeper than a whole lot of these philosophers who we know in the analytic philosophy departments.
Well, philosophy has itself become a little too narrow. No, I love the analytic tradition of philosophy. That's my tradition.
No, I understand.
But we can become too narrow. We can become too focused on precise distinctions and lose sight of the great questions. This is what I've always admired about Cornel. When I was talking about those seminars we were in before we got to know each other very well, those seminars among people interested in political philosophy at Princeton, Cornel would always bring us back to the question at hand, that is, what is right, what is just, what is true, what is good, because we professional philosophers could get hung up, and we did get hung up so often on technical debates about relatively unimportant distinctions, and we get into the weeds and lose sight of the big questions. And Cornel always made it, his job to bring us back so that we don't forget what it is we're talking about here. Is this right or wrong? Is this good or bad? What contributes to the fulfillment of human beings and what detracts from it? What is consistent with human dignity and what is inconsistent with human dignity?
Should we obey unjust laws?
Well, unjust laws by themselves do not bind in conscience. Now, we may have other reasons to do what an unjust law would require us to do. But unlike a just law, which binds in conscience, an unjust law doesn't. That's the message of Martin Luther King in the letter from Birmingham jail. And here, what he's doing is just drawing on a much broader tradition that really does go all the way back through the medieval period to people like Aquinas and Augustine, and ultimately back to Plato and Aristotle and Sophocles. That writing that we begin with in all of our seminars, Antigone by Sophocles, raises that very question. Is the fundamental requirement to obey the king, the law, the just law, not the just law, but the governing law of that society? Or is there a higher law, a moral law, what King, again, following Aquinas and others, calls a natural law, that supersedes the positive law, the human law, when there's an inconsistency with the natural law and the human law? And King says, yes, the higher law prevails, the natural law prevails over the merely human law. Human law is good when it is consistent with the natural law. Human law is bad, unjust, when it is inconsistent. Laws that are consistent with the natural law uphold human personality and dignity. Laws that are inconsistent with the natural law degrade the human being. Ultimately, that's what it comes down to.
Cornel West, same question.
Well, I have a conception of we human beings as being so wretched, so deeply tied to organized greed and weaponized hatred and institutionalized indifference, that if we disobeyed every unjust law, we spend most of our lives in jail. We just would. Martin Luther King Jr., he zeroed in on particular unjust laws. He had been following Jim Crow laws himself for most of his life. How's he gonna live his life? How's he gonna treat his mama and his daddy and pastor his church and so forth? These unjust laws proliferate, not just in America, in every nation state, in every empire. And if you're obsessed with every unjust law, you might as well just walk into jail and say, I'm gonna be here until I drop dead. So you got to be jazz-like. You got to have your timing in place. This particular unjust law, I'm gonna stand, I'm gonna fight, no matter what. I know there's other unjust laws. I can't hit them all at the same time. Now the Daniel Berrigans and Philip Berrigans and others, they spent most of their life in jail because they're concerned with so many unjust laws, and I respect that tradition. But I do think that Robbie's formulation in terms of criteria that comes right out of the letter from Birmingham jail of Martin King is a crucial one. But none of us can be as consistent as we would like to be, because the lack of justice is so pervasive in the human story, including this very moment. We could talk about America, we could talk about in Africa, we could talk about in the Middle East with Gaza, we can talk about India with Modi, we can talk about Uganda mistreating gays, we can talk, the injustice is so overwhelming. What do? You fight consistently in some way, but you can't just spend your whole life in disobedience. You got to sooner or later call it for what it is and keep moving and zero in on other laws that you might have an impact on.
King makes a very important point, and it's important for us not to lose sight of it, and that is we need law. The worst danger, the worst condition that we could be in is a condition of lawlessness, of anarchy, because in that condition, the powerful work their will over the weak. The vulnerable are constantly at risk of predation from the powerful. We need law. Some of those laws are going to fall short of justice. In this vale of tears, us human beings, frail, fallible, fallen creatures that we are, not all of us are going to be just. And sometimes we do have to violate unjust laws. But the worst condition, as King reminds us, is lawlessness. The weak fundamentally benefit from there being a system of law at all, because in what some philosophers call the state of nature, where there's no law, as Hobbes teaches, life is poor, solitary, nasty, brutish, and short. The powerful can do anything they want, and the weak are at their mercy.
Exactly. I mean, that's one of the reasons why, again, my own Christian tradition means much to me, because I was just reading the other day, the first 35 popes, 31 were martyrs.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And that's something people forget about that. Out of the first 35 popes, 31 were martyrs. How come? Because they refused to worship the gods of the Roman Empire, which made them atheists. No, we're going to worship this God of Abraham, and Joshua, and Jacob. Isaac and Jacob, I'm sorry.
Jesus.
And then following Jesus, following that Jewish brother Paul especially, who had his Damascus transition, going blind in 3 days, and Ananias allowing him to see, going to Arabia, going to Mount Sinai, and then helping facilitate this new way of being in the world. And for those Christians who are following the way of love in a cold, cruel world, just like the Jesus who had been crucified, you see. Now, what does that mean? That means that, well, if you want to be a Christian and live and not be a martyr too soon, you're going to have to time your sense of making sure you accent certain unjust laws, talk about them, critique them, go to jail for these, go to jail for others. But in the end, as Robbie knows that I learned in Vacation Bible School from Sarah Ray, if the kingdom of God is within you, then everywhere you go, you ought to leave a little heaven behind. And the fundamental question will be, how much heaven are we leaving behind?
Were you exposed to books at a young age in Sacramento and the same in West Virginia?
Very early, with Mom. Irene West, teacher, principal, elementary school named after her, Irene B. West School, elementary school. Yeah, Mom early on reading this poetry. And we're reading the Bible, reading some of the greatest world poetry in the history of the world, the book of Job, and other Hebrew scriptural texts. And then, once we get to high school, but especially college. I mean, Black Panther Party had exposed us to Marx and Fanon and others very early on, right down the street from the church. But it was really when I got to college that I got exposed to the whole plethora of deep figures and voices.
Where did you go to school, Dr. West?
The high school?
No, to college.
Oh, I went to Harvard College in the Neolithic age. Long time ago.
You should talk about the bookmobile, because that was before
now
you
that's
went to
true.
college.
Now that's true. Yeah, the bookmobile they had there in Glen Elder, where I grew up, the chocolate side of town in Sacramento, one of the chocolate sides of town. And it was there where I really encountered Kierkegaard and Einstein. Einstein meant and continues to mean much, not just as a great genius and scientist, but as the militant pacifist. He was a particular kind of socialist. It has nothing to do with the socialism that people talk about today. It flowed from his deep compassion in his own secular Jewish world of what it meant to be in solidarity with oppressed people. So when I was at Harvard, I had a picture of Einstein and Malcolm X right next to each other. Those two pictures.
Did you have those pictures up in your dorm room?
No, I did not. I think I had a Linda Ronstadt. I think that was it. I loved her music.
She's talented. She got great talent now.
Yeah, she was. So my parents, unlike Cornel's parents, who were college-educated people, my parents were not college-educated. Both of my grandfathers were coal miners in Appalachia, and my father was really spared the mines because of World War II. He was drafted at age 18 before he even finished high school. Later, the school sent his parents a diploma, so he didn't have a graduation. He was off in Normandy and Brittany fighting Second World War, and then served with the occupation forces afterward. Then when he returned, he had some skills and that military training, which gave him some opportunities otherwise wouldn't have had. So he didn't end up in the coal mines, and I guess that's why I didn't end up in the coal mines. But he didn't, in his circumstances, have the opportunity to go to college, nor did my mom. So I wasn't brought up around books in the way that Cornel was with highly educated parents.
Right.
But my father was always interested in history, and I remember that he did have the miniature version, the 2-volume version of Sandburg's Lincoln, Carl Sandburg's Lincoln.
Wow.
And he had some biographies. He loved biographies. And I remember him sitting there. He would, after he'd come home from work, and he'd read the newspaper, and then he'd pick up one of those biographies or a work of history. I remember he had one of Winston Churchill. He was a great, of course, as people in his world were, he was a great devotee of Franklin Roosevelt. I like to say we were brought up with 4 core beliefs when I was a kid in my father's family. We believed in Jesus Christ, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the Democratic Party, and the United Mine Workers of America. And I still believe in Jesus Christ. The others, I kind of lost my faith. But those are what we believe. And so, my father, being interested in history, would read those kinds of works.
Back to Truth Matters. You teach or taught The Iceman Cometh in prisons. Walk us through that.
Yeah, in fact, that was part of one of the lectures there, the Gifford lectures. No, I think it's the most powerful, profound, bleak, grim play ever written in the history of American letters.
Eugene O'Neill?
Eugene O'Neill, that's exactly right. He wrote it in 1936, but it goes back to 1910, 1911, which is the year he actually tried to commit suicide. But it's Harry Hope's saloon. You remember, and all the drunkards are sitting around, and they've all reflecting on their own past. They've given up, they've caved in, or either they've sold out, and they're unable to take the courage, to muster the courage to step outside of the saloon. So it's nihilism enacted, not abstract. It's not obtruse at all. It is a lovelessness, a hopelessness, a grinlessness, a touchlessness, and the only thing that speaks to them is that alcohol. That's Eugene O'Neill, and that is his indictment of not just human condition, but of America. He said America was the greatest tragedy because it had the greatest possibility, and it refused to execute because it didn't believe enough in honesty and integrity. It opted for greed rather than liberty. Very important. Here we are at the Freedom Fest. And he said most people, when they're offered a choice between greed and liberty, they'll choose greed every time. Now, he's not right about that in terms of every case, but it's an echo or an extension of Dostoevsky's great prose poem of the Grand Inquisitor. Human beings don't really want to be free, they want to be drilled. They don't really want liberty, they want to be not just told what to do, but they want bread. And it goes back, of course, to Jesus. Human beings don't live by bread alone. It's something deeper, something grander. That's what Eugene O'Neill can't find plentiful enough in American present when he's writing. And he's writing, of course, Depression, beginning of World War II, the end of the age of Europe, massive massacres and catastrophes in terms of levels of bestiality and barbarity on the battlefield. Hitler seems to be in the driver's seat. All of this is coming at him at the same time. He's our greatest playwright. And he's not the smartest, he's not the most sophisticated. Tennessee Williams, much more lyrical. August Wilson, more lyrical. But Eugene O'Neill's like Theodore Dreiser. He may not have the best style, but he's got the power. And that makes a difference. When you got that kind of power, you don't always have to be the most sophisticated and lyrical. No, not at all.
What's the reaction of the prisoners?
It's multivarious. Sometimes they get more down and out, and we talk about bounce back, because there is a bounce back that we can use Eugene O'Neill as a launching pad. Other times they say, this Irish brother is talking about me. And most of the brothers that I'm teaching in the prison, of course, are chocolate, black and brown. There's some vanilla folk, but not too many in my classes.
I'm going to close our conversation with 2 quotes.
Yes.
This is Cornel West in Truth Matters. When we talk about why truth matters, we're really talking about allowing our precious students full access to the great intellectual traditions that will force them to wrestle with what it means to be human in their fallible quest for truth and beauty and goodness and the holy.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, that sums it up.
I think that's what we're trying to do.
We don't apologize for focusing on the central texts of the Western tradition. We have great respect for other traditions. We bring insights when we can from the other traditions into the conversation, but our students are students whose heritage is the West. They may have come from Japan, they may have come from China, they may have come from Ghana, they may have come from India, many of course have European ancestry and come from all over the world, but they're here. And this heritage of the West is their heritage. So we want to expose them, confront them with the best that has been thought and said. And the best will not be entirely in harmony with each other. They're going to be reading the best on all sides of questions, and we're going to be challenging them to wrestle with the best arguments for views they may happen to share, but also for views that they reject, and perhaps very vociferously reject. But that's how you deliver the, if I can use the word, I'm at risk of commodifying here, the product that it's our job to deliver, and that is paideia, deep education, education that goes beyond transmitting information or teaching certain skills. Those are important. It's important to have correct information. It is important for our students to know that Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant and not Dwight David Eisenhower at Appomattox Courthouse. We want them to know the facts. We want them to have information. And we want them to develop certain skills. But beyond that, those are the minimum. Beyond that, we want them wrestling with the deep, hard questions of what it means to be human.
Are there any topics, public or private, between you two that are simply off limits?
Absolutely not.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Not for our classes, not for each other.
If somebody wanted us to go into the details of the intricacies of black holes and quantum physics, we would tell them, you can read some Jerry Holton, who writes letters to the Philistines, or you can read Bohr, or you can read some of the great physicists themselves. But we're not teaching that in this class. But it relates to physics, because physics is what? Like music, like metaphysics, like all the other dimensions of what it is to be human. They're magnificent adventures of ideas to try to make sense of the world and try to be forces in the world.
If you're a genuine truth seeker, you're putting questions on the table. You're putting your most cherished convictions on the table. You don't know who you're going to be at the end. That can be frightening, because we do tend to wrap our emotions more or less tightly around our convictions. Robert George.
That's my brother Robbie. He's telling the truth. But I think part of the implication is, yes, you want to speak truth to power. Yes, you want to speak truth to the relatively powerless. But in the end, you want to speak the truth to yourself, to one's own self. Melville has this wonderful line in the greatest short story of American literature, Billy Budd. He says, truth uncompromisingly spoken always has its ragged edges, which means it cuts at us. It cuts at the spiritual wickedness in high places. It cuts in the middle. It cuts everywhere. That's serious truth question there.
Author and Professor Cornel West, author and Professor Robert George, thank you both for being with us.
Well, thanks for listening to this week's Q&A podcast produced by C-SPAN. If you like this podcast, tell your friends, rate and review us, and follow us on social media @BookTV for more updates and schedule information. And are you looking for more of C-SPAN's book programming? Follow our Bookshelf podcast feed, your one-stop source for the Afterwards, Book Notes Plus, and Q&A podcasts. Discover compelling conversations with authors, historians, and thought leaders all in one place. Subscribe to C-SPAN's Bookshelf podcast today. Next week, our guest is Nicole Kobe, author of the book The Long History of the Future, in which she explores the promise and disappointments of technology and advancement.